listening to the Construction Big Breakfast, where we give you a hearty serving of insider tips and business strategies to help fuel your day so you can thrive in the construction industry.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Construction Big Breakfast. My name is Aidan Baun, and I'm going to be your host today. And joining me today is Tyler from Monograph. So, Tyler, welcome. Welcome to the podcast. Would you like to just introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Aidan. Appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here on the Construction Big Breakfast podcast here. My name is Tyler Suomala. I work on the business development team at Monograph, which is an operations kind of management tool for architecture firms. But I have a background in architecture. I've been in it for about the last decade or so. I have a bachelor's and master's in architecture, worked in firms small and large, and even ran my own little practice for a little bit too before jumping over to the technology side of things and making use of my experience here, where I feel like I can have a larger impact on more than just one firm at a time.
Very good. Very good. Well, look, you're very welcome. We have a tradition on this podcast where, with it being the Big Breakfast podcast, we do ask, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I see. I don't want to disappoint all of the breakfast aficionados here, but I'm an intermittent faster. I don't know if I'm the only one here, right? So I actually don't typically eat until noon. So this morning for breakfast, I had exercise and a lot of water. That's about what I've had. Yeah.
I also am an intermittent faster, so yeah, similarly to you, exercise and black coffee. So I don't know if that's cheating the system, but yeah.
I can excite anyone that likes breakfast by saying that unfortunately for me, my wife and toddler son had pancakes for breakfast, so I did have to smell that while I was exercising and drinking water this morning, because why not?
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
As any intermittent faster will understand, they have a family that doesn't join in on their fun.
Well, look, I think it was a couple of months ago I started following you on LinkedIn. You were putting out some really good content on kind of the business development side of running an architecture practice, and I thought it'd be really good to get you on board, see what's happening on that side of the Atlantic in terms of architecture practice and how they're winning work. So just talk to me a little bit about the sorts of content you're putting out and the types of topics that you're covering.
Yeah. Well, I will say, if I've learned anything, I've just become more active on LinkedIn beginning this year, right? So we're basically 6 months into it, and I feel like if I've learned anything, it's that architecture challenges seem to be universal, despite me, assuming that it was maybe only my Americanized version of what I thought the challenges were of architecture. Now speaking to people all throughout the world, it seems to be relatively consistent and uniform. But in my business development role, essentially what I get to do is talk to endless architects, mostly firm owners and principals, about the challenges that they're facing in their practice. So what I generally talk about are findings from those conversations, like what are the common challenges that I'm seeing among architecture firms. And then the big realization for me in basically I essentially switched from running my own little sole proprietorship into being in a business development role at Monograph. And what I very quickly realized was that I did a terrible job at business development when I was running my own practice, because I don't think I realized how important business development was and how large of a difference it can make just from basically making a little bit of an effort and to understand some of the challenges that your client might be facing before you jump into it.
Interesting. And what do you think some of those errors were in when you were running that practice?
So there was a few. One was that I was I didn't have a system set up for business development, right? So, when you're starting a practice, that first project kind of comes in a little bit from like connections, word of mouth, things like that happen. And then you're 2 months into working on that first project and you realize there's only a month left. You haven't brought in any more work. And then you kind of have that, oh crap moment of how do I do this? Like, where do I go? Where do I find more work? So understanding like the different, basically, it's essentially like building pipelines.
Yeah.
And I think there's 3 different pipelines that are pretty easy to manage, no matter what size firm you have. And it's just a matter of kind of organizing them. So one is obviously like the word of mouth, which I consider to be referrals. So you nurture that by doing good work, is the first step of that. But the second step of that is just honestly like asking your clients who you've done good work for, if they know of anyone that's interested in working with an architect, or simply asking for them to write a review, because this is, I mean, it's 2022, and despite the fact that most architecture firms don't like to accept the fact that so much happens online, a ton happens online. And so at the end of all of my projects, for example, I would offer to take off, $100 for my invoice if they wrote a review online, for Google. And
Nice.
within a couple of months, I was the most reviewed and had the highest reviews like in my local area, which translated to a ton of inbounds coming in, just from making a small difference, because you get a lot of action coming in. That was mainly through, I think it was just like Google reviews. So depending on the size or the scale of your firm, the type of work that you do, it really does benefit you to have those reviews, and it can make a pretty big difference.
Massively. And I think even if there's a lot of talk about B2B and B2C buying, kind of the way in which we buy becoming more similar. And like you say, get those reviews up online. People can do their own research before they start to engage with you, and it's going to be a smoother process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what were the second and third?
Yeah, so the second one kind of relates to that first one, right? It's marketing and inbound. So that's essentially, you want to get more traffic into your website or more traffic onto your phone line in some way. So that can happen through those Google reviews. That can also happen just from kind of being clear on your website about what it is that you do and making it really easy to reach out to you. Everyone knows you get a huge mix of inbound, right? Like there's definitely a qualifying moment that has to happen there. But I would rather have to, be too busy qualifying deals than be out there trying to find additional projects.
Oh, 100%.
That's a good problem to have if you're in that moment where you need to be choosing which ones, yes or no, you want to continue following up with. That's that's a good problem to have. And the last one is outreach, is essentially outbound, right? So these are ones that firms don't like chatting about. So that can be like, you have the RFPs, which I'm not personally a huge fan of, but like depending on the scale of your firm, the size of the work that you do, this changes drastically, right? If you're talking to a large international firm, I honestly don't even know what outbound strategy looks like. But if you're talking about, firms of less than 50 or less than 20 doing a mix of residential and commercial work, for me, it was as simple as looking at who are the builders in my local area, calling them up, or in like a 50, 100-mile radius, calling them up and asking them if they have an architect that they're working with and what they think about, the architect the architects that they've been working with, if they need additional help. And just from doing that, I was able to generate a few other pipelines, so that when they got work, because I don't know, what I realized was what you learn in school is that you become an architect and people come to you, which is maybe true in large cities. I was personally like doing a sole proprietorship in a smaller town, right? So when people think, oh, I want to build something, I want to do something, they go to a builder. They don't go to an architect first. They don't think to look for an architect because they don't even realize that there's architects around. So like I needed to develop and nurture relationships with builders who needed architects, to do the drawings and do the design.
Yeah. So the first two, I think everyone's well aware of. And there's a lot of practices that put some great pictures on their website, previous projects, and hope that that's going to kind of generate inbounds. But the reality is, and this is my personal opinion, that all inbounds are generated from some form of outbound activity. It can't just sit there passively. So how do you actually get? I know you said you kind of pick up the phone and ring local firms. That can be testing.
Jarring, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so actually my favorite types of posts that I see online sometimes, or even when you're in threads for architecture firms, and you're in conversations with architecture firms, is the conversation that's like, um, calling is bad, cold calling is bad, don't do it.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite types of messages to see, because that just makes it so much easier for people like me, or for anyone that's just willing to pick up the phone and call someone.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stigma attached to this idea of a cold call, and
Yeah.
it being like having some kind of negative connotation. Um, but I'm not selling them something that they don't need. Ideally, right? I'm
True.
not trying to force someone into something that's not going to be mutually beneficial for
Yeah.
them. I'm honestly just like calling to inquire, and you don't even have to think about it as selling your services. I'm just asking them, hey, how's it going with the architects that you're working with?
Yeah.
Um, and just start a conversation. You get a pretty good sense, not too long into that call, if they're happy or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can kind of direct the conversation based on that. But I mean, that was I didn't even know how to make a cold call when I had done it before. I was just calling, and I was really hesitant, and I was like, hey, I just started my practice. I'm calling some of the local builders, wondering if they're looking for an architect, or if they have any architects that they're working with. And that
Yeah.
was, I mean, that alone was enough. I mean, people are pretty receptive. Like, is you got to tell them why you're calling up front.
Yeah.
Um, but that was without me really even knowing how to make a cold call, and it worked out. It worked out just fine.
Well,
Um,
it probably didn't sound like a cold call, so it probably worked
right,
really effectively.
right. Yeah, because it's not really a cold. I mean, to me, a cold call is like you're calling someone that you're not sure if it's a good fit, that
Yeah.
doesn't know you, and that you're even trying to like qualify on the phone. But
Yeah.
you can quote unquote, you can warm that up just by knowing that, hey, they're a builder, they work on residential projects,
Yeah.
and they're in your local area. So immediately you're already like, okay, well,
Yeah.
it's applicable to me.
Yeah.
And they're going to be interested in talking about someone else in their area that's in the same industry, that's doing the same things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you say, you know that your service is going to be of use.
Yeah,
So pick up the phone and just have that conversation. So,
yeah.
what sort of technology were you using in order to kind of, I would say, maybe build these lists, then understand that data, understand what's moving through your pipeline? Was there tools you were using?
Well, so when I was doing my own practice, I wasn't even aware that what I was doing was business development. I was just trying to
Yeah.
find work, right, in that sense. So I didn't have a way of tracking it. Now I realize, in a specifically being in a business development role at Monograph, there's tools that can make a significant difference. And the easiest way to make a significant difference, I think, in your business development is just like having a CRM. And
Yeah.
there's so many great ones out there. At a certain point, like we were just chatting before we hit record, right? So I feel like if you're talking to more than 10 or 20 like potential projects, it's time to get off of a piece of paper or get off of a spreadsheet and get
Yeah.
into a CRM. Um, that's going to make it a lot easier to track leads,
Yeah.
um, and you just break those down based on, you have certain buckets that you're placing leads into depending on where they're at in the process, right? You might have leads that just came in that you still need to qualify, versus
Yeah.
ones that you've qualified, that you're beginning negotiations with, versus ones that are, you're in negotiation with them and you're just trying to get them to sign the contract.
Yeah.
And those are all very different processes. And if you don't know how many are in negotiation, if you don't know how many firms you're qualifying, if you don't know these things, you have no way to forecast your future. You have no way to understand if you're going to need to bring on additional talent. You have no way to even know if what you're doing on the business development side is working or not.
Yeah.
So it's one of these things where, like, if you're not tracking it, if you're not measuring it, there's no chance of you improving it. There's just no chance. And CRMs make that so much easier to track and understand, iterate, improve,
Yeah.
and can have a massively positive impact on your firm.
I think the other thing that we've certainly seen over the years is that uh, construction projects are fantastic places to build networks. You're forced into a room. You'll be sat around a table with an engineer, a contractor, another architect, whoever it is, and storing those relationships in a system where you can find them is so valuable to you as a business. And actually, if you don't have that, we've got people that we've worked with where they've got 14 different spreadsheets with different contacts across all of them. It's not located anywhere. It's not useful. You can't do anything with the data. And having that store of data is just absolutely critical.
That's such a great point. I actually never thought about that, but it reminds me of architects are. I'm speaking. I know that know that you're generally in the AEC, right? I'm thinking specifically of architects just because I am an ex-architect. I speak specifically with architects, but there's this double-edged sword with architects, which is that they're all very, intelligent. They're very educated. But the double-edged sword, the backside of that is that they believe they can store everything in their head. Right. So I'm talking to architects. I'm asking them, hey, how do you know if your project's profitable or where your projects are at? And they're like, oh, I have a sense for it. Like I'm walking around the firm, I'm asking, I can see where things are at. Well, how do you know when you need to hire someone? I can feel it out. It's like, it's like there's based on it's all very emotional, right? I'm feeling things out. I'm doing these things. Best thing you can do for your practice and your employees is get it out of your head, get it into something else, because you have enough to think about, enough to worry about. Like you want to focus, architects want to focus on design. They don't want to be focusing. I mean, there are some that like enjoy focusing on business development, and some firms will break down their principles in that way, but not a reliable strategy to keep it in your head. It's not going to work.
No, it's not. And having someone, so having someone devoted to business development in our experience is pretty rare. It's often kind of left to people to get on with. These people in this sector, these people, what's going on with them, but it hasn't necessarily got a defined strategy, which means it just falls down that priority list because there's more pressing things.
I think, I mean, there's definitely a source of that, right? It's like in our architectural. Do you have a background in architecture, Aidan, or in AEC?
So I'm a geologist by background, but I've worked in the construction industry for almost a decade.
Okay, got it. That's awesome. I mean, in the background, in the educational background of architects, business is not very heavily weighted, which every architect will tell you, and which you see me probably talk about relatively frequently online. And so you're getting into why are you getting into architecture when you go to school for it? You're getting into it for design 99% of the time. So then after you get out of school, you start working at firms, you start moving up in that firm, and then you realize there's a business component to architecture. You're just generally not as attracted to it because you didn't come into architecture for that. So firm owners and principals, as you find team members that are more attracted to those things, you should latch on to them, nurture them, because they're just rare, honestly, as you know, they're rare in the industry. So you have to capitalize on them when you have them in your firm.
You do, and I think also it comes down to, just to bring it back onto CRM systems for a moment, but a lot of the lack of business development activity is led by uncertainty on how you actually go about doing it. But if you have a system that tells you, right, these are the people we need to stay engaged with, let's come up with an action plan on how we can actually do that, it makes it much simpler for everyone. You can say, right, I'm going to give you these 5 people over the next month. I need you to go and see them. That's much more manageable than, can you go and find some work?
Yeah.
Right.
Not only that, I mean, it can be brainless in the sense. I mean, you can build sequences for nurturing your people. Hey, I have someone, I have this bucket of people that they're not ready to start for a couple of months. The best method there isn't to not chat with them for a couple of months. It's to send them something every couple of weeks and say, hey, here's a project that we're doing that's relatively similar to that. Here's projects that we've done that are similar to this. Excited to chat with you in a couple of weeks. Like you want to keep them warm and keep them interested, because there's no bigger killer of projects and deals than time. So you want to minimize the amount of time between when they essentially remember you.
Yeah. And how's the social selling going for you? Has it been effective?
You mean like on
LinkedIn? Yeah, because you're saying it's kind of something relatively new.
Yeah. Relative. I mean, from the standpoint of like building a network and building relationships, it's been huge. Like, I don't think I could have imagined 6 months in having built so many great relationships.
Great.
The podcasts are one thing, but I think I've probably taken 10 or 15 conversations with really incredible people, like
Oh,
off of
cool.
LinkedIn, into chats, just understanding, just met a lot of amazing people in the industry and getting into conversations with them. And that's just like putting aside obviously the pipeline that I've built for myself on the
Yeah.
Monograph side, of firms that just come to me because they know that I'm on business development at Monograph and are interested in improving their operations. So
Yeah.
it has had multiple benefits.
Yeah. Interesting. And then just taking it through past kind of work, wedding on to kind of the delivering of work, operational side of things. What are you seeing there when you're talking to these owners of firms?
Yeah, like what are the operational challenges I'm seeing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest ones are just that you know, it's disorganized
Okay.
is it would probably be the best way to describe it. So you have firms that like they want to understand their projects. They want to track their project performance. They want it to be easier for them to staff out for the week ahead and
Yeah.
know how much remains on each budget for each person. So the most challenging processes I think that firms have on a regular basis are staffing for sure is like the top one. I don't mean hiring, which is
Yeah.
that's a separate one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean like literally how are you assigning who's working on what for the upcoming week and
Yeah.
distributing those hours in a in a balanced way.
Yeah.
That's a huge challenge that I think architects face. And I think the other one is just giving leadership and PMs visibility into project performance.
Yeah.
So usually when I'm chatting with firms, it's they might be using a few different systems, a mix of a platform with some personal spreadsheets with some like task management thing, and they're doing the best they can to like how do I like possibly manage all of the components of a project. Um, so the biggest thing that Monograph helped was, and I think it's not the only one. There's other options too, but the biggest thing that you can do is get all of those processes into one platform.
Yeah.
Um, Consolidate your data into one system, and that makes such a huge difference because then you have reliable data. You have one
Yeah.
place that you need to look to find it, and you don't have to walk around the office, check in with your PMs on their personal spreadsheet that you have to like peer over their shoulders, look at to get an understanding of what project performance is at. Um, so it's like it's a little mix of you need something that's easy to use. Um, you need to have habits in place in your firm so that you can rely
Yeah.
on your employees to add their time, update these things so that you're not finding out at the end of the month when you're building those invoices that are 25% over on your schematic design phase, which is also not uncommon at all. This is 95% of the firms I'm chatting with are basically struggling with all of these things. Their data's all over the place. They're only finding out when they go to invoice that things are, beyond what they wanted them to be. Um,
Yeah.
and they're struggling to get their team to adopt something that usually isn't easy to use or that they just don't even understand what the value of it is.
I mean, adoption is critical, isn't it? Because,
Yeah.
as you say, if you're getting those reports at the end of the month, by that point it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah, it's this difference of being proactive rather than being reactive. And right now, 99% of firms are reactive. And that's not just on the operations side. I mean, that's on business development as well, right? You're just waiting
Yeah.
for something to come in and then you're reacting to it. So being proactive is like doing those outbound things. Or
Yeah.
even like when they come in, it's just like the discovery process like we were chatting about earlier. Like there's just if you can get into a proactive state rather than a reactive state, you are significantly ahead of the competition right now.
100%. 100%. I'm. Do you know what? I think that's actually a perfect way to finish that, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah,
Try
of
that
course.
that is a great. Yeah, everyone needs to be a lot more proactive than they are. So, Tyler, where can people find you to follow your posts and your information and learn a bit more about Monograph?
Yeah. So the best place to find me, as Aidan kind of alluded to at the beginning, is on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. I'm really not active anywhere else. I post every morning on LinkedIn, on just under Tyler Suomala. And then if you want to find more about Monograph, you can just go to monograph.com. But I will leave it with, because I know you mentioned this at the beginning, a lot of the listeners here are from the UK, so apologize for my Americanism here, but we're not quite working in the UK yet, so it's primarily just for US based firms.
Yeah, and we will put your links in the footer of the YouTube video so people can find them there if they would like to see them. But
Yes.
Tyler, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, I had a great. You lost. No, I had a terrible time. No, I'm just kidding. I had a really great time, Aidan. I really appreciate it. And then likewise to you, to the listeners. I really love to open up conversations on LinkedIn. So comment on my post, reach out to me, shoot me a message on LinkedIn as well. Love to chat with you all.
Brilliant, perfect. And thanks to all you listeners. If you did enjoy this episode, please hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you back next week for another episode. All right, bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Construction Big Breakfast. Make sure to visit our website, www.inventt.com, where you can subscribe to the Construction Big Breakfast on all platforms so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a positive rating. Or if you'd simply share it with a friend, that would help us out too. Be sure to tune in for our next episode.